Don't ever believe a lie. It will destroy you like a slow-acting poison. The more you swallow, the less you notice it's killing you. My stepmother made me believe I was defective. I didn't know I was living in a pit dug by lies and deceit. I spent 21 years scrubbing floors and believing I was nothing. Serving guest in the ceremony I should be picked, ignored until the Alpha King saw me. My name is Ella, the last descendant of the Luna sovereign bloodline. This is my story. Chapter 1, Invisible Omega. The crystal champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of Sterling Tower's executive dining room. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me, powerful alphas, influential betas, and their perfectly manicured mates, all watching as I dropped to my knees among the glittering shards. Pathetic, Victoria Sterling hissed from her seat at the main table, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light from the chandelier above. Can't even hold a glass properly. My cheeks burned as I carefully picked up each piece, the sharp edges biting into my fingertips. Blood droplets stained the white marble, and I knew Margaret would make me scrub it with bleach until my hands were raw. Again. Perhaps we should invest in plastic cups for the help, Sophia Sterling added with a cruel laugh that echoed through the room. At 19, she was only 2 years younger than me, but the gap between us might as well have been a canyon. She sat in a designer dress that cost more than most people made in a year, while I wore the standard servant's uniform, a shapeless gray dress that made me invisible. That was the point, of course. I was meant to be invisible. Enough, came a sharp voice that made my spine straighten involuntarily. Margaret Sterling rose from her position beside the PAC's executive board, her ice blue eyes fixed on me with the kind of cold fury that had haunted my nightmares for 12 years. Ella, clean this mess and return to the kitchens. Our guests shouldn't have to witness such clumsiness. Yes, ma'am, I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. The suppression collar around my neck felt tighter than usual, the silver burning against my skin as my wolf tried to stir beneath the surface. But nothing happened. It never did. As I swept up the remaining glass, fragments of conversation drifted around me like smoke. Sterling Enterprises posted another record quarter. The London PAC is requesting increased territory rights. When will Prince Alexander return from his European acquisitions? That last comment made my hands still for just a moment. Prince Alexander Sterling. The heir to the most powerful werewolf empire in the world. I'd never seen him in person. He'd been managing overseas operations for the past 5 years, but his reputation preceded him. Ruthless in business. Devastating to enemies. Irresistible to women. And completely out of reach for someone like me. Did you hear? Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts as she leaned toward her sister. Father says Alexander is finally ready to choose a Luna. There's going to be a formal mate selection gala next week. My heart did something strange in my chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a longing I couldn't name. I pressed my hand to the spot where my mating gland should be, feeling only the numbing burn of the suppression collar. Every eligible female will be there, Sophia squealed. Can you imagine? One of us could be the next Luna Queen. One of us will be, Victoria corrected with smug confidence. After all, we're Sterling blood. Alexander wouldn't dare choose anyone beneath our station. Sterling blood. The irony wasn't lost on me. Technically, I was a Sterling too, had been since Margaret married my stepfather 12 years ago. But adoption papers didn't change the fundamental truth. I was unwanted, unworthy, and utterly powerless. I finished cleaning and crept toward the kitchen door, hoping to escape before anyone noticed my departure. But Margaret's voice stopped me cold. Ella. I turned slowly, keeping my eyes downcast as she approached. Even without looking directly at her, I could feel the waves of disgust rolling off her perfectly composed figure. "The pack leaders will be staying late tonight to discuss the European expansion," she said, her voice carrying the same warmth as a winter storm. "You'll remain in the kitchens to assist with refreshments." "And Ella?" She stepped closer, her breath cold against my ear. "Try not to embarrass the family name any further." The family name. As if I'd ever been considered part of this family. "Of course, ma'am." She dismissed me with a wave, returning to her seat among the pack elite. I slipped through the kitchen doors, finally allowing myself to breathe normally once I was out of sight. The Sterling Tower kitchens were a marvel of modern efficiency, all stainless steel and state-of-the-art appliances that could feed an army. Tonight, they were preparing delicacies for the most powerful supernatural beings in North America. Wagyu beef for the alphas. Delicate pastries infused with honey for the betas. Nothing for the omega who would serve it all. I'd eaten a piece of bread this morning and would be lucky to get scraps from the evening's leftovers. Ella, thank goodness, Sarah, the head cook, bustled over with relief written across her weathered features. She was one of the few people who treated me with basic human decency, though she was careful never to show too much kindness when Margaret was around. "I need you to prepare the coffee service. The Colombian blend for King Marcus, the French roast for the European delegation." I nodded, grateful for something to keep my hands busy. As I worked, muscle memory taking over, my mind wandered to the conversation I'd overheard. Alexander Sterling was coming home. After 5 years of building the Sterling Empire across 3 continents, the prodigal prince was ready to take a mate. The thought sent an unexpected shiver through me. I'd seen his pictures, of course. It was impossible to avoid them when his face graced the cover of every supernatural business magazine in existence. Dark hair that looked perpetually tousled by expensive styling. Eyes the color of storm clouds. A jawline that could cut glass. He was beautiful in the way that apex predators were beautiful, deadly and utterly compelling. But it was more than his looks that captured my attention. There was something in his eyes in those photographs, a depth that suggested hidden complexity beneath the ruthless businessman facade. Sometimes, late at night when I was scrubbing floors in the empty mansion, I'd find myself wondering what it would be like to have someone look at me with even a fraction of the intensity one saw in those storm-gray eyes. Foolish dreams for a broken omega. The coffee finished brewing, filling the kitchen with rich, intoxicating aromas. I arranged the service on silver trays, making sure each cup was perfect. Margaret's standards were impossibly high, and failure meant punishment that could last for days. As I prepared to carry the trays out, my reflection caught in the polished surface of the coffee pot. Hollow cheeks from too many skipped meals. Dark circles under green eyes that had once sparkled with hope. Mousy brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to hide how desperately I needed a proper cut. The suppression collar circling my throat like a brand of ownership. This was what 21 years of life had given me. This was all I would ever be. Ella? Sarah's voice was gentle. The coffee's getting cold. I straightened, pushing down the familiar ache of self-pity. Survival meant keeping moving, never stopping long enough to truly feel the weight of my circumstances. The dining room had settled into the comfortable rhythm of powerful people discussing even more powerful things. I moved between the tables like a ghost, refilling cups and removing empty plates with the practiced invisibility I'd perfected over the years. The suppression collar helped. It muted my scent to almost nothing, making me forgettable to the predatory senses of the gathered alphas. The Singapore acquisition went smoother than expected, one of the European delegates was saying. Alexander's negotiation style is remarkably effective. King Marcus Sterling laughed, a sound like controlled thunder. Even in his 60s, he commanded every room he entered with the kind of presence that made other alphas instinctively submit. My son has a gift for making people see things his way. It served the family business well. And now it's time for him to serve the family in other ways, added an elegant woman I recognized as the Luna Queen from the Canadian territories. A powerful alpha needs an equally powerful mate. The bloodlines must remain strong. My hand trembled slightly as I refilled her cup. Bloodlines. Always came back to that. The supernatural world was built on a foundation of genetic superiority, and omegas like me were considered the weakest links in that chain. Breeding stock at best, servants at worst. Alexander will choose wisely, King Marcus said with absolute confidence. He always does. I continued my circuit around the room, catching fragments of conversation about territorial disputes, corporate mergers, and political alliances that would reshape the supernatural world. This was the level at which the Sterling family operated, not just as werewolves, but as the architects of an entire civilization. And I was the girl who cleaned their floors. As the evening wore on, the discussions grew more animated and the alcohol flowed more freely. I'd learned long ago to make myself especially invisible when powerful predators started drinking. Inhibitions lowered. Scents became more intoxicating. And omegas became targets. I was refilling water glasses at a corner table when I felt it, a prickle of awareness that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Someone was watching me. Not the casual dismissive glances I was used to, but focused attention that felt like a physical touch. I looked up instinctively, scanning the room for the source of the sensation. But everyone seemed absorbed in their conversations, no one paying attention to the invisible servant moving among them. The feeling persisted as I finished my rounds and retreated to the kitchen. Sarah was already cleaning up, her movements efficient despite the late hour. "How much longer do you think they'll be at it?" she asked, wiping down counters with practiced ease. "Another hour, maybe 2, I replied, though truthfully, I had no idea. These gatherings could last until dawn when the politics got complicated enough. "You look tired," Sarah observed with the kind of maternal concern that always made my chest tight. "When's the last time you ate something substantial?" I couldn't remember. Time had a way of blending together when survival was your only goal. "I'm fine." She made a noise that clearly indicated she didn't believe me but knew better than to push. Instead, she wrapped up leftover pastries in a clean towel and slipped them into my hands. "For later," she said quietly. "And Ella? Try to get some real sleep tonight. You're starting to look like a ghost." If only she knew how accurate that description was. I felt like a ghost most days, drifting through a life that belonged to someone else, watching from the sidelines as real people lived real lives. I was about to respond when the kitchen doors burst open. Margaret strode in with the kind of barely contained fury that meant someone was about to pay dearly for something. "There you are," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" My stomach dropped. "Ma'am? The coffee you served to the European delegation. It was the wrong blend. French roast instead of the Colombian they specifically requested." Ice flooded my veins. I'd been so careful, double-checking each pot before I'd carried them out. But even as I tried to remember, doubt crept in. Had I mixed them up? In my distraction thinking about Prince Alexander, had I made such a basic mistake? I thought I was careful, I stammered. "Thinking isn't good enough," Margaret snapped. "These are the most powerful alphas in the supernatural world, and you've insulted them with your carelessness. Do you have any idea how this reflects on our family?" "I'm sorry, Sorry doesn't fix damaged relationships or lost business deals." She stepped closer, and I could feel the heat of her anger radiating outward. You will spend the rest of the night cleaning every surface in this tower. Every floor, every window, every piece of silver. Maybe manual labor will help you focus better in the future. My legs nearly gave out. The Sterling Tower had 47 floors. Even working through the night, I wouldn't finish before the morning staff arrived. But arguing would only make things worse. Yes, ma'am. And Ella? Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. If you embarrass this family again, there will be consequences beyond a sleepless night. Do I make myself clear? The suppression collar seemed to tighten around my throat. Perfectly clear. She swept out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with Sarah, who looked horrified by the exchange. That woman, Sarah muttered under her breath. There's got to be a special place in hell for people who... Don't, I interrupted quietly. It's not worth the risk. Sarah's expression softened with sympathy, but she nodded. We both knew the reality of our positions. Margaret Sterling had the power to destroy either of us with a word. Survival meant keeping our heads down and our opinions to ourselves. I gathered cleaning supplies from the service closet, my movements mechanical as I tried to process the punishment ahead of me. 47 floors. Thousands of square feet of marble, glass, and steel. My back already ached just thinking about it. But as I loaded the industrial cart with supplies, something else occurred to me. The European delegates had seemed perfectly satisfied with their coffee when I'd served it. No complaints, no disgusted expressions, no requests for replacement. In fact, I distinctly remembered one of them complimenting the rich flavor. Which meant either my memory was completely unreliable, or Margaret had lied about the mistake to justify the punishment. The second option seemed more likely. But why? What had I done to deserve this level of cruelty? As I wheeled the cart toward the elevator, fragments of the evening's conversation echoed in my mind. Alexander Sterling was coming home. There would be a mate selection gala. Every eligible female would compete for the chance to become Luna Queen. And I would be exactly where I'd always been, invisible, ignored, and utterly irrelevant to the real world happening around me. The elevator climbed toward the top floors, and I tried to push down the familiar ache of loneliness that threatened to overwhelm me. This was my life. This was all it would ever be. The sooner I accepted that reality, the easier everything would become. But as the doors opened onto the executive level, that strange prickle of awareness returned, stronger this time. The sensation of being watched, evaluated, seen in a way that made my suppressed wolf stir restlessly beneath my skin. I looked around the empty hallway, my heart beating faster than it should. Nothing but shadows and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Just my imagination. Had to be. I began with the windows, working methodically to erase every fingerprint and smudge from the floor-to-ceiling glass that offered breathtaking views of the city below. The Sterling Tower stood at the heart of the supernatural district, surrounded by businesses and residences that catered to our kind. During the day, it bustled with activity as werewolves, vampires, fae, and other supernatural beings conducted the business that kept our hidden world running. At night, it was beautiful in a cold, distant way. Like looking at stars, magnificent but unreachable. As I worked, my mind wandered to the life I might have lived in a different world. A world where my parents hadn't died in the car accident that left me orphaned at 9. A world where Margaret had married my stepfather out of love instead of calculated social climbing. A world where I'd grown up knowing my worth instead of having it systematically destroyed. In that world, maybe I would have been preparing for the mate selection gala like Victoria and Sophia. Maybe I would have been excited about the possibility of catching Prince Alexander's attention. Maybe I would have believed I deserved love and happiness and a future that extended beyond servitude. But this wasn't that world. This was a world where accidents of birth determined everything, and I'd been born on the losing side of every equation that mattered. I was cleaning the marble floors on the 32nd level when exhaustion finally started to set in. My knees ached from kneeling, my shoulders burned from the repetitive motions, and my hands were raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. The pastries Sarah had given me were long gone, consumed hours ago in a futile attempt to maintain my energy. The smart thing would be to pace myself. 47 floors was a marathon, not a sprint. But the thought of disappointing Margaret again, of facing whatever consequences she'd threatened, kept me moving even when my body screamed for rest. I was so focused on my work that I almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway behind me. Almost. My head snapped up, every instinct screaming danger. The building should have been empty except for security, and they never patrolled the upper floors during events. But someone was there. I could hear the measured pace of expensive shoes against marble, could catch the faint scent of cedar and something darker that made my suppressed wolf pace restlessly. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the cleaning cloth like a shield. Hello? The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, silence stretched between me and whoever was out there in the shadows. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the building. Every survival instinct I'd developed over 12 years of living in this family screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The elevator was at the other end of the hall, and whoever was out there stood between me and escape. "I'm sorry," I called out, my voice shaking despite my attempts to control it. "I didn't know anyone was up here. I'll move to a different floor." Still no response. I took a cautious step toward the elevator, then another. My bare feet were silent against the cold marble, but each step felt like it echoed through the empty space. The scent was getting stronger, cedar and storm clouds and something that made my mouth water despite my fear. 3 more steps. 4. The elevator was still 20 feet away, but if I could just... "You missed a spot." The voice came from directly behind me, so close I could feel breath against my neck. I spun around with a gasp, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. A man stood in the shadows where no one had been moments before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that had been tailored to perfection. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch, storm gray and intense, focused on me with the kind of attention that felt like being caught in a spotlight. Prince Alexander Sterling. I'd have recognized him anywhere, even without the photographs that covered every business magazine in the supernatural world. But seeing him in person was like being struck by lightning. He was beautiful, yes, but in a dangerous way that made every cell in my body vibrate with awareness. He was also supposed to be in London for another week. "Your Highness," I managed, dropping into the clumsy curtsy Margaret had drilled into me years ago. "I apologize for disturbing you. I didn't realize you'd returned." He didn't respond immediately, just studied me with those devastating eyes as if I were a puzzle he was trying to solve. The silence stretched until I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. "You're working late," he said finally, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made alphas instinctively submit. It should have sent me to my knees. Instead, something in my chest fluttered like wings. "Yes, sir. I'm cleaning the tower as instructed." "All of it?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "Yes, sir." Something flickered across his expression, surprise, maybe, or anger. It was gone too quickly to interpret. "What's your name?" "Ella Sterling, Your Highness." His eyes sharpened. "Sterling?" "By adoption, sir. I'm Margaret Sterling's stepdaughter." The pause before the word stepdaughter was telling, and I could see him process the implication. In the supernatural world, adoption without blood bonds often meant one thing: servant with a more palatable title. I see. He moved closer, and I caught the full force of his scent, cedar and storms and something uniquely, devastatingly masculine. My knees went weak. And Margaret felt it necessary to have you clean the entire building alone? There was something dangerous in his voice now, a subtle threat that made the air around us feel charged. I pressed myself harder against the wall, unsure how to answer without making things worse. I made a mistake, sir. With the coffee service earlier. This is my consequence. What kind of mistake? I served the wrong blend to the European delegation. The words felt hollow as I spoke them, because now, looking into those intense gray eyes, I was certain I hadn't made that mistake at all. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving my face. Then, impossibly, one corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. The European delegation specifically requested French roast, he said quietly. They mentioned how much they enjoyed it before they left. My heart stopped. What? You served exactly what they wanted, Ella Sterling. Which makes me wonder why you're being punished for doing your job correctly. The world tilted slightly. Margaret had lied. She'd created a mistake that didn't exist to justify punishing me, and I'd been too beaten down to trust my own memory. I don't understand, I whispered. Alexander stepped even closer, close enough that I could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Don't you? The question felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. All I knew was that this man, this powerful, dangerous, impossibly attractive man, was looking at me like I mattered. Like I was worth seeing. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely impossible. Your Highness, I should return to my work. No. The word was soft but absolute. You should go get some sleep. I can't. If I don't finish. You will finish. But not tonight. He pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. I've just sent instructions to building security. They're to provide whatever assistance you need to complete your assigned tasks over the next week. During normal working hours. I stared at him in shock. I don't understand. Why would you? Because, he said, and there was something in his voice that made my suppressed wolf lift her head for the first time in years. No one should be punished for doing their job well. Before I could respond, he was moving away, dissolving back into the shadows as silently as he'd appeared. I was left alone in the hallway, my heart racing and my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers for. Prince Alexander Sterling had noticed me. More than noticed, he'd intervened on my behalf, had seen through Margaret's lie with a clarity that made me dizzy. For the first time in 12 years, someone had stood up for me. Someone who could destroy Margaret with a single word if he chose to. I gathered my cleaning supplies with hands that shook from more than exhaustion. The encounter felt like a dream, too impossible to be real. Princes didn't notice servant girls. They certainly didn't care about the petty cruelties of pack politics. But his scent lingered in the hallway, cedar and storms and promise. And for the first time since my parents died, I found myself wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to my story than I'd been allowed to believe. The elevator carried me down to the servants' quarters in the building's basement, my reflection ghostly in the polished doors. I looked the same as always, tired, underfed, forgettable. But something had changed in that hallway. Something I couldn't name but could feel in the very center of my chest. Tomorrow, Victoria and Sophia would continue preparing for the mate selection gala. Margaret would continue treating me like a burden to be endured. The world would continue spinning exactly as it always had. But tonight, a prince had seen me. really seen me. And that changed everything, even if I didn't yet understand how. I fell asleep on my narrow cot with the memory of storm gray eyes and the impossible scent of cedar and promise filling my dreams. And for the first time in years, I dreamed of something more than just survival. I dreamed of being seen. Chapter 2, Forbidden Dreams. 3 days passed before I saw Prince Alexander again, though his presence haunted the Sterling Tower like expensive cologne lingering in empty rooms. The building security had indeed been instructed to help me complete my cleaning duties during regular hours, a kindness that left me dizzy with gratitude and confusion in equal measure. Margaret's fury was a living thing, radiating from her like heat from a furnace whenever our paths crossed. She couldn't directly contradict a prince's orders, but she found other ways to express her displeasure. Reduced meal portions. Earlier wake-up calls. A steady stream of additional, minor tasks that kept me busy from dawn until well past midnight. But I endured it all with something I hadn't felt in years: hope. "You're different," Sarah observed on Thursday morning as I helped prepare breakfast for the family. "There's something. I don't know. You seem more present." I paused in my task of arranging fruit on sterling silver platters, wondering how to explain the shift I felt inside myself. 3 days ago, I would have accepted Margaret's lie about the coffee without question, would have punished myself more thoroughly than she ever could. Now, I found myself examining every accusation, every casual cruelty, with new eyes. "Just tired," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. But it was a different kind of exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that came from years of learned helplessness finally beginning to crack. Sarah didn't sound convinced, but she let it drop. "Well, whatever it is, keep it up. You look more alive than you have in months." Alive. The word followed me as I carried breakfast trays to the family dining room, where Victoria and Sophia were deep in conversation about the upcoming mate selection gala. "I heard the guest list is incredible," Sophia was saying, her voice pitched with excitement. "Not just North American packs, but European royalty, Asian dynasties, even some of the Australian clans." "Of course it is," Victoria replied with smug confidence. "Alexander Sterling doesn't do anything halfway. When he chooses a mate, it'll be an event that reshapes supernatural politics for generations." I set their plates down with practiced invisibility, but something made me linger longer than usual. Maybe it was the way they spoke about him like a prize to be won, or maybe it was the memory of storm gray eyes looking at me like I was worth seeing. "Do you think he has preferences?" Sophia asked. "I mean, beyond the obvious breeding requirements?" "Power," Victoria said without hesitation. "Alphas like Alexander don't choose mates based on emotion. They choose strategic alliances. The female who can bring the most to the Sterling Empire will be the one wearing the crown." Strategic alliances. Breeding requirements. The clinical way they discussed what should be the most intimate decision of a person's life made something twist unpleasantly in my stomach. Was that really how the supernatural elite viewed mating? As just another business transaction? "Ella." Margaret's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Stop hovering and finish your duties." "Yes, ma'am." I retreated toward the kitchen, but not before catching Victoria's next comment. "I still can't believe he came back early. Father says he flew in unexpectedly Tuesday night, didn't even notify the staff. Very unlike him to be so spontaneous. Tuesday night. The night he'd found me cleaning the 32nd floor. The night he defended me against accusations I hadn't even realized were false. Had he come back early because of business, or was there something else drawing him home? The thought was dangerous, the kind of hope that could destroy what little peace I'd managed to find. princes didn't alter their international travel schedules for servant girls. Whatever had brought Alexander Sterling back to the tower early, it had nothing to do with me. But as I worked through the morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in the supernatural world. The staff whispered about increased security, about mysterious meetings that ran late into the night, about tensions between the Sterling pack and their traditional allies. And through it all, the memory of cedar and storms lingered at the edges of my consciousness like a half-remembered song. I was polishing silver in the main kitchen when the whispers reached me, excited chatter from the junior staff about preparations for something big happening that evening. "What's the occasion?" I asked Sarah, who was supervising the preparation of what looked like enough food for a small army. "Emergency pack meeting," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Every Sterling ally within 100 miles has been summoned. Whatever it's about, it's got everyone on edge." Emergency meetings meant late nights, which meant more opportunities for me to move unseen through the building. Over the past 3 days, I'd found myself drawn to the upper floors during my evening duties, hoping for another glimpse of the man who'd changed everything with a few simple words. It was pathetic, I knew. But after 12 years of invisibility, being seen, really seen, had become an addiction I couldn't shake. "Ella." Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression more severe than usual. "You'll be serving tonight's gathering. The usual protocols apply: invisible, silent, and absolutely no interaction with the guests unless specifically instructed." "Of course, ma'am." "And Ella?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't know what games you think you're playing, but remember your place. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed." The threat was clear, even if I didn't fully understand its context. I nodded obediently and watched her sweep away, but something rebellious stirred in my chest. For 12 years, I'd accepted every boundary she'd set, every limitation she'd imposed. But Prince Alexander's intervention had planted a seed of doubt that was growing stronger by the hour. What if my place wasn't where she said it was? What if the lines she'd drawn were illusions designed to keep me contained? The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Evening came with unusual energy crackling through the Sterling Tower. Pack leaders arrived in expensive cars and private jets, their entourages filling the building with the kind of supernatural power that made the air itself feel heavy. I recognized faces from the supernatural news: alphas who controlled entire territories, business magnates whose decisions shaped global markets, political figures who moved in shadows between human and supernatural governments. Whatever was happening tonight, it was bigger than the usual territorial disputes or merger discussions. I dressed in my standard serving uniform, black dress, white apron, comfortable shoes that wouldn't make noise against marble floors, and braided my hair back so severely it pulled at my scalp. The suppression collar felt heavier than usual, the silver burning against skin that had grown more sensitive over the past few days. The main conference room on the 40th floor had been transformed into something resembling a war room. Maps covered every wall, marked with territories and alliance boundaries in different colors. Screens displayed financial data, territorial populations, and what looked like military assessments of various pack strongholds. But it was the tension in the room that struck me most. These were some of the most powerful supernatural beings in the world, and they were afraid. I moved between the tables with practiced invisibility, serving drinks and removing empty plates while trying to piece together fragments of conversation. Reports from the European territories are disturbing. Coordinated attacks on 3 separate pack holdings. Traditional territorial boundaries mean nothing to them. If they're targeting bloodline registries. Bloodline registries. The phrase made my suppressed wolf stir restlessly. Every supernatural being was registered based on their heritage, their genetic markers, their place in the complex hierarchy that governed our world. The registries weren't just bureaucratic documents, they were the foundation of supernatural law and order. Gentlemen. Ladies. Prince Alexander's voice cut through the murmured conversations like a blade. I looked up from refilling water glasses to see him standing at the head of the room, command radiating from every line of his body. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Even surrounded by the most powerful alphas in North America, he dominated the space effortlessly. Tonight he wore a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame, but it was his presence that made every other person in the room seem diminished by comparison. His gaze swept the assembly, and for just a moment, it landed on me. Storm gray eyes met mine across the crowded room, and I felt that same electric shock I'd experienced 3 nights ago. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to just that connection, that recognition. Then someone stepped into his line of sight, and the moment was broken. The intelligence we've gathered over the past month confirms our worst fears, Alexander continued, his attention back on the assembled pack leaders. The Shadowmere Coalition isn't just targeting individual territories. They're systematically hunting specific bloodlines. A chill ran through the room. The Shadowmere Coalition was whispered about in the darkest corners of supernatural society, a group of rogue supernaturals who rejected the traditional hierarchy and sought to overthrow the established order. Most dismissed them as urban legend, but the fear in this room suggested otherwise. What bloodlines? Asked Luna Queen Catherine from the Canadian territories, her voice tight with concern. Alexander activated one of the wall screens, displaying a list of names that made several people gasp audibly. Ancient lines. Founding families. The genetic heritage that's maintained stability in our world for over a millennium. My hands trembled as I refilled glasses, the implications hitting me like physical blows. If someone was hunting bloodlines, targeting the genetic foundation of supernatural society, then nowhere was truly safe. Not for any of us. How many casualties so far? King Marcus asked from his position at the head of the table. 43 confirmed deaths across 7 territories, Alexander replied grimly. But the real damage isn't just the deaths, it's the disruption to breeding programs, alliance structures, territorial agreements. They're not just killing people. They're destroying the bonds that hold our civilization together. I was so focused on the conversation that I almost missed Victoria's gesture for more wine. I moved to refill her glass, my mind racing with the implications of what I was hearing. Bloodline hunting. Systematic attacks on the genetic elite. The overthrow of supernatural order itself. Need to increase security around high-value targets. Bloodline verification protocols should be enhanced. What about the minor lines? The adopted families with questionable heritage. That last comment came from someone I didn't recognize, but it made my blood freeze. Minor lines. Questionable heritage. They were talking about people like me, supernaturals whose genetic background couldn't be easily verified, whose place in the hierarchy was uncertain. Were we targets too? Or were we so far beneath notice that we didn't matter either way? I was pouring wine with hands that shook more than they should when disaster struck. The crystal decanter slipped from my grasp, tumbling toward the white marble floor in what felt like slow motion. But instead of shattering, it stopped midair. Suspended 3 feet above the ground, rotating slowly as if held by invisible hands. Every conversation in the room ceased. 60 pairs of supernatural eyes fixed on the impossible sight of a crystal decanter floating in defiance of gravity. And then, as one, they turned to look at me. The girl whose wolf had never manifested. The Omega who couldn't even properly submit. The servant who shouldn't possess any power at all. But there it was, undeniable evidence that I was something more than I'd been told. The decanter continued to hover, responding to some instinct I didn't understand, some ability I'd never known I possessed. Fascinating, Prince Alexander said quietly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. He moved toward me with predatory grace, his storm-gray eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. It seems we have more than one mystery to solve tonight. The suppression collar around my neck began to burn, silver heating against my skin as whatever power I'd accidentally accessed pressed against its constraints. Pain shot through me, sharp and immediate, and the decanter crashed to the floor in a shower of crystal shards. "I'm sorry," I gasped, dropping to my knees among the glittering fragments. "I don't know what happened." "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize." Alexander's voice was closer now, and I looked up to find him crouched beside me, completely ignoring the broken glass that surrounded us both. That was telekinesis. Omega wolves don't have telekinesis. I can't. The words tangled in my throat as the collar continued to burn, silver searing my skin with increasing intensity. "No," he agreed quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're not what they told you were, are you, Ella Sterling?" Before I could respond, Margaret's voice cut through the charged atmosphere like a whip. "Ella! How dare you disrupt this gathering with your clumsiness?" "Enough." Alexander rose to his full height, and the word carried such absolute authority that Margaret's complaints died mid-sentence. "Everyone out. Now." "Alexander," King Marcus began, "surely this can wait." I said everyone out. There was something dangerous in his voice now, something that made even the most powerful alphas in the room step back instinctively. "This meeting is adjourned." The pack leaders began filing out, their conversations a buzz of speculation and concern. But I remained frozen on my knees among the crystal shards, the collar burning against my throat and my mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. I had power. Real, undeniable power that defied everything I'd been told about my nature, my limitations, my place in the world. And Prince Alexander Sterling had seen it all. "Ella." His voice was gentle now, coaxing rather than commanding. "Look at me." I raised my head, meeting those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. "The collar," he said quietly. "How long have you been wearing it?" 12 years, I whispered. "Since my stepfather adopted me." Something flickered across his expression, rage, maybe, or something even more dangerous. 12 years of suppression. No wonder your wolf couldn't manifest properly. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above the silver band around my throat. "This isn't just jewelry, Ella. It's a prison. And I think it's time you were free." But before he could touch the collar, Margaret's voice rang out from the doorway. "Step away from her, Your Highness. You don't understand what she is." Alexander's hand stilled, but his eyes remained fixed on mine. "Then explain it to me." Margaret moved into the room with careful, measured steps. "She's dangerous. Unpredictable. The collar isn't punishment, it's protection. For everyone." "Protection from what?" "From the bloodline she carries." Margaret's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "From the power that destroyed her family and could destroy us all if it's ever fully awakened." The words hit me like physical blows. My bloodline. My family. The parents whose death had been explained as a simple car accident. What bloodline? Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Margaret hesitated, and in that pause, I saw something that shocked me more than anything else that had happened tonight. Fear. Margaret Sterling, who had terrorized me for 12 years, was afraid of me. "Tell him," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Tell him what bloodline you've been suppressing all these years." Margaret's perfect composure cracked just slightly. "She carries Luna's sovereign genetics. Ancient royal blood that was supposed to be extinct. Her parents died trying to hide her from those who would use her power, and I've spent 12 years making sure she never learned the truth. Luna's sovereign." The words echoed in the sudden silence like a death knell. Even I knew that name from the oldest supernatural histories, the bloodline that had once ruled over all werewolf territories, the genetic heritage so powerful it had been systematically eliminated centuries ago to prevent any one family from dominating supernatural society. "Impossible," Alexander breathed. "The Luna sovereigns died out in the 1800s. "Obviously not," Margaret said grimly. "And now you see why the collar was necessary. Luna's sovereign power without proper training and control could tear apart the fabric of supernatural society itself." I stared at her, my mind reeling with revelations that rewrote everything I thought I knew about myself, my parents, my place in the world. "The car accident," I said slowly. "It wasn't an accident." Margaret's silence was answer enough. "They were murdered." The words felt like stones in my throat. "My parents were murdered because of what I am." "What you could become," Margaret corrected. "The collar ensured you'd never reach that potential. It was the only way to keep you safe." "Safe?" The word came out as a snarl that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. "You call 12 years of abuse and suppression keeping me safe? Better than 12 years of running from those who would kill you for your bloodline," Margaret shot back. "Better than becoming a weapon for whatever faction could capture and control you first." Alexander had been silent during this exchange, but now he stepped between Margaret and me with deliberate intent. "That choice was never yours to make. Wasn't it? I was her guardian. Her protector. Her jailer." His voice carried absolute conviction. "And her tormentor. Everything I've witnessed over the past few days makes sense now. You didn't just suppress her power, you systematically destroyed her sense of self-worth to ensure she'd never question the limitations you imposed." The truth of his words hit me like a revelation. Every cruel comment, every impossible standard, every punishment for crimes I hadn't committed, it had all been designed to keep me small, contained, convinced of my own worthlessness. It was necessary, Margaret insisted, but there was desperation creeping into her voice now. It was monstrous. Alexander's attention turned back to me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Recognition. Not just of what I was, but of who I could be. "Ella, do you trust me?" The question should have been impossible to answer. I'd known him for less than a week, had spoken to him exactly twice. But looking into those storm-gray eyes, feeling the certainty that radiated from his very presence, I found my answer without hesitation. Yes. His smile was fierce and beautiful and full of promise. "Then let's see what you really are." Before Margaret could protest, before I could second-guess my decision, Alexander's fingers closed around the suppression collar. The silver burned both of us where we touched, but he didn't let go. Power flowed between us, his strength combining with mine, his certainty bolstering my courage. The collar began to crack. 12 years of suppression, 12 years of forced limitation, 12 years of being told I was nothing, all of it shattered along with the silver band that had defined my existence. Power flooded through me like a dam breaking. Not just the telekinesis I'd accidentally displayed, but something far more fundamental. Raw, ancient power that made the very air around us shimmer with possibility. My wolf, suppressed and caged for so long, finally lifted her head and howled with joy that echoed in dimensions beyond the physical. And in that moment of liberation, of truth finally unleashed, I felt it, the pull that connected me to the man who had freed me. The recognition that went deeper than attraction, deeper than gratitude, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. The mate bond. Prince Alexander Sterling wasn't just my rescuer. He was my fated mate. And from the way his eyes widened, the way his breath caught, the way his own power rose to answer mine, I knew he felt it too. The Luna sovereign bloodline had awakened. And everything was about to change. Chapter 3, Moonlight Awakening. The mate bond hit like lightning striking water, electric, consuming, impossible to ignore. Every cell in my body recognized Alexander Sterling as mine, while my newly awakened wolf sang with a joy so profound it brought tears to my eyes. But the euphoria lasted only seconds before reality crashed back. Do you have any idea what you've done? Margaret's voice cracked like a whip, shattering the moment of connection between Alexander and me. The collar wasn't just suppression, it was protection. From them. From everyone who would use her or kill her for what she represents. Alexander's hand was still on my throat where the collar had been, his touch gentle against skin that felt hypersensitive to every sensation. She deserves the choice. Choice. Margaret laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. There is no choice for someone carrying Luna's sovereign genetics. There's only survival or death, and I've spent 12 years ensuring her survival. The power flowing through me was intoxicating, like coming alive after years of holding my breath. But with it came awareness, of every supernatural signature in the building, of the complex web of alliances and enmities that surrounded us, of the very real danger Margaret spoke about with such conviction. What happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Alexander's storm-gray eyes met mine, and I saw the conflict there, desire warring with duty, protectiveness battling with practical concerns. Now we figure out how to keep you safe while you learn to control your abilities. Safe? Margaret stepped closer, her perfect composure cracking further. Do you think your title will protect her from the Shadowmere Coalition? From the European families who still remember the Luna Sovereign Wars? From every ambitious alpha who would see her as either a weapon or a threat to be eliminated? Then what do you suggest? Alexander's voice carried a dangerous edge. Keep her collared and caged forever? Pretend she's something she's not? I suggest, came a new voice from the doorway, that we discuss this somewhere more secure. King Marcus Sterling entered the room with the kind of presence that made everyone else seem smaller by comparison. Even at 65, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator in his prime, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing as they assessed the situation. Father, Alexander said carefully. This is. I know exactly what this is. Marcus's attention fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. The question is what we do about it. I found myself caught between two sterling alphas, their combined presence making it difficult to think clearly. The newly awakened power in my veins responded to their dominance with instincts I didn't understand, part submission, part challenge, part something else entirely. Your Majesty, I managed, attempting the same clumsy curtsy I'd performed for Alexander days ago. None of that. His voice carried absolute authority. If you're truly Luna Sovereign, protocol dictates you bow to no one except your mate. The words sent a shiver through me. My mate. The bond between Alexander and me was so new, so overwhelming, that I hadn't fully processed what it meant beyond the immediate attraction and recognition. The bloodline tests will confirm it, Margaret said quickly. But until then, she stays close. Alexander's decision cut through any other suggestions. If the Shadowmere Coalition is hunting Luna bloodlines, separating her from pack protection would be suicide. Pack protection that failed 43 other targets, I pointed out, my voice stronger than I'd expected. The power humming through me seemed to lend confidence along with ability. All three of them turned to look at me with surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was capable of independent thought. She has a point, Marcus said slowly. Traditional security measures won't be sufficient for this level of threat. Then what do you propose? Alexander asked. His father smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. We accelerate the timeline. What timeline? The mate selection gala. Marcus moved to the wall of windows overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. It was scheduled for next week anyway. But instead of a formal courtship process, we announce your mating immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm sorry, what? A mated Luna sovereign under sterling protection is a very different target than an isolated bloodline heir, Marcus continued as if I hadn't spoken. The political ramifications alone would give most enemies pause. You're talking about a political marriage, I said, that familiar feeling of powerlessness creeping back despite the energy coursing through my veins. Using me as a pawn in supernatural politics. I'm talking about keeping you alive, Marcus replied bluntly. The mate bond makes it a genuine pairing, not a political arrangement. But we don't. I looked helplessly at Alexander, who was studying me with an expression I couldn't read. We barely know each other. The bond knows, Alexander said quietly. Everything else is just details we'll work out together. Together. The words should have been comforting, but all I could think about was how completely my life had changed in the span of an hour. This morning I'd been a servant with no prospects and no hope. Now I was apparently supernatural royalty with a fated mate who was heir to the most powerful werewolf empire in the world. It was too much. All of it was too much. I need air, I said, backing toward the door. I need to think. Ella. Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. I know this is overwhelming, but leaving the building right now isn't safe. Nothing about this is safe. The words burst out of me with more force than I'd intended, and I felt power ripple outward from my body. The remaining crystal shards on the floor trembled, and the windows rattled in their frames. All 3 sterlings went very still. Interesting, Marcus murmured. Raw power output suggests she's already stronger than most trained Luna bloodlines. She needs guidance, Margaret said, her voice tight with what might have been fear or concern. Luna's sovereign abilities without proper control have historically been catastrophic. Then she'll have guidance. Alexander stepped closer, and I felt the mate bond pull between us like a physical tether. From the best teachers we can find. There are no teachers for Luna's sovereign abilities, Margaret snapped. The bloodline was eliminated specifically because their power couldn't be safely contained or controlled. Obviously it wasn't completely eliminated, I pointed out, gesturing to myself. No, agreed a new voice that made everyone in the room freeze. It wasn't. The woman who appeared in the doorway looked like she was made of moonlight and shadows. Tall, ethereal, with silver hair that seemed to move in a wind no one else could feel. Her presence filled the room with power that made my newly awakened abilities seem like a candle next to the sun. Who are you? Marcus demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon he always carried. The woman smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrible. I am Lioness Sovereign. Ella's great-grandmother. And I've been waiting 21 years to have this conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Alexander seemed stunned speechless, his storm-gray eyes wide with shock and something that might have been recognition. Impossible, Margaret whispered. Lioness Sovereign died in 1847. Did I? Lioness moved further into the room with fluid grace that didn't quite look human. Or did I simply transition to a different kind of existence? You're dead, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. You're a ghost. Spirit, she corrected gently. bound to this plane by the need to protect my bloodline. To ensure the Luna sovereign legacy survived long enough to serve its purpose. What purpose? Alexander found his voice, though it sounded strained. Lyanna turned those ancient, knowing eyes on him. To prevent the supernatural world from tearing itself apart. The Luna sovereigns weren't eliminated because they were too powerful. They were eliminated because their power could unite the werewolf nations under one rule. Something certain factions found inconvenient. The Shadowmere Coalition, I said, the pieces clicking together. They're not just hunting bloodlines randomly. They're targeting anyone who could challenge their vision of supernatural society. Very good. Lyanna's approval warmed something in my chest. The coalition wants chaos, wants the old hierarchies destroyed so they can rebuild the world in their image. But a true Luna sovereign, properly trained and protected, could rally the werewolf nations like nothing else could. You're talking about war, Marcus said grimly. War is already coming, Lyanna replied. The only question is whether the werewolf nations will face it united or divided. The weight of expectation settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Unite the werewolf nations. Rally supernatural society. Prevent a war that could destroy everything. I don't know how to do any of that, I said desperately. I just learned I had powers an hour ago. I can't even control basic telekinesis without destroying things. Which is why I'm here. Lyanna stepped closer, and I caught her scent, moonflowers and starlight and something ancient that made my wolf whimper with recognition. To teach you what you need to know. To help you claim your birthright. In how much time? Alexander asked. Because if the coalition is actively hunting Luna bloodlines, we're operating on borrowed time already. The mate selection gala, Lyanna mused. Yes, that could work. A public claiming, witnessed by representatives of every major pack. It would make the political statement needed while buying us time to develop her abilities. A week isn't enough time to train someone with Luna's sovereign power, Margaret protested. It will have to be. Lyanna's voice carried finality. Because they already know she's awakened. The room went dead silent. What do you mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Power calls to power, child. The moment your abilities manifested, every supernatural within 100 miles felt it. Including any coalition operatives in the area. How long do we have? Alexander's question was sharp with urgency. Hours, perhaps. Certainly not days. Lyanna looked directly at me. The choice is yours, Ella. Hide again, suppress your power, live as a shadow of what you could be. Or embrace your heritage and fight for the future of our people. I looked around the room at the faces watching me, Marcus with calculating assessment, Margaret with fear and regret, Alexander with a mixture of protectiveness and something deeper that made my heart race. If I do this, I said slowly, if I try to become what you think I can be, what happens to the life I thought I wanted? The simple life where I'm just normal. Normal was never an option for you, Lyanna said gently. Your parents knew that when they died protecting your secret. The question is whether their sacrifice will mean something, or whether it will be just another tragedy in a long line of bloodline extinctions. My parents. People I barely remembered, but who had given everything to keep me safe. Who had died so I could have the choice that was now being offered. What would I need to do? Alexander stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Accept the mate bond. Publicly. Let me claim you as my Luna so that sterling protection becomes your shield while you learn to protect yourself. And after? After, we figure out how to use your power to unite our people instead of letting the coalition tear us apart. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me. Luna sovereigns who had ruled with wisdom and strength. Parents who had died to give me this moment. A mate who was offering to stand beside me against impossible odds. When I opened my eyes again, I felt different. Stronger. More certain. Okay, I said. Let's do this. Alexander's smile was fierce and proud and full of promise. Then we start now. Lyanna, how quickly can you teach her basic control? That depends, my great-grandmother replied, on how quickly she can let go of 21 years of believing she was powerless. She held out her hand, and I could see moonlight gathering around her fingers like liquid silver. Are you ready to discover what you really are, Ella Sovereign? I took her hand, and power flowed between us like a river finding its course. Not the wild, uncontrolled surge I'd felt when the collar broke, but something focused and purposeful and infinitely more profound. My wolf lifted her head and howled with recognition and joy, and for the first time in my life, I felt complete. But even as power settled into my bones like coming home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Somewhere in the city, coalition operatives were already moving. The hunt had begun. And I was no longer prey. Chapter 4, Fated Recognition. The training began immediately. Lyanna led us to a secure floor of sterling tower I'd never seen before, a level that didn't appear on any building directory and required biometric clearance to access. The space was part dojo, part laboratory, and part something I couldn't quite define. Ancient symbols carved into steel walls. Moonlight that seemed to shine from the ceiling despite the fact that we were 40 stories above ground. Air that hummed with contained power. This is where we trained the last Luna sovereigns, Lyanna explained as Alexander and I followed her deeper into the space. Your great-great-grandmother practiced here in 1823 before she unified the Eastern Territories. I thought Luna sovereigns were extinct by then, I said, still struggling to process the rapid revelations about my heritage. Publicly, yes. But the bloodline survived in secret for another few decades. Until... She trailed off, her expression growing distant. Until what? Until they killed the last known heir in 1847. Or so they thought. Lyanna's ethereal form solidified slightly, as if the memories gave her more substance. Your great-grandfather survived that massacre by being thought dead. He lived quietly, never manifesting his full power, never drawing attention to himself. Like I was supposed to do, I said quietly. Like you were forced to do, Alexander corrected, his voice carrying an edge of anger that made my newly awakened wolf purr with satisfaction. Even now, hours after the mate bond had snapped into place, his protectiveness toward me was a constant, comforting presence. The difference, Lyanna said, is that hiding is no longer an option. The coalition knows you exist now. The only way forward is through power. She gestured to the center of the room, where a circle of silver had been inlaid into the floor. Symbols I didn't recognize surrounded it, though something about them felt familiar in a way that made my skin tingle. Step into the circle, child. I hesitated, looking back at Alexander. The mate bond made it physically difficult to move away from him, as if invisible threads connected us that grew taut with distance. I'll be right here, he said softly, understanding my reluctance without needing explanation. I moved to the center of the circle, and immediately felt the change. Power that had been chaotic and overwhelming since the collar's removal suddenly organized itself. Like tuning an instrument or focusing a lens. The sensation was so profound I gasped. Better? Lyanna asked with a knowing smile. Much. I looked down at the symbols surrounding me. What is this place? A focusing chamber. Luna's sovereign power is vast, but it needs structure to be useful. These symbols help channel your abilities so you can learn control without destroying half the city in the process. The casual way she mentioned destroying half the city should have been alarming. Instead, it was strangely reassuring to know that the overwhelming power I felt wasn't actually unmanageable, just untrained. What do I need to learn first? I asked. Shielding, Alexander said immediately. If coalition operatives are already moving, your priority has to be protection. Shielding comes from understanding, Lyanna corrected. And understanding comes from acceptance. Ella, you've spent 21 years being told you were weak, broken, less than what you should be. Before you can learn to use your power, you need to truly believe you deserve it. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Even with evidence of my abilities right in front of me, even with the mate bonds singing in my veins and Alexander's unwavering support, part of me still expected this to be some cruel joke. Some elaborate punishment designed to give me hope before crushing it entirely. I can see the doubt in your eyes, Lyanna said gently. It's understandable. But doubt is poison to Luna's sovereign abilities. Our power comes from absolute certainty, in ourselves, in our purpose, in our right to command the forces we channel. How do I get that certainty? By facing the truth about who you are. And who you've always been, even when you didn't know it. Lyanna began walking around the circle, her footsteps silent against the floor. Tell me, child, in all your years of weakness, were there moments when things went your way despite the odds? I frowned, thinking back. Maybe. Sometimes when Margaret was particularly cruel, something would happen to distract her. A phone call, or someone needing her attention urgently. And when you were truly afraid? When you felt your life might be in danger? The memories came slowly, incidents I'd dismissed as coincidence or luck. There was a pack enforcer once who cornered me in the basement storage room. He was drunk, and he said he wanted to see if I was really as broken as everyone claimed. But then the lights went out. All the lights in the building. And in the confusion, I got away. Alexander's growl was low and dangerous. What enforcer? It doesn't matter, Lyanna said quickly. What matters is that Ella's power has been protecting her all along, even through the suppression collar. Even when she didn't know she possessed it. The idea that I'd been unconsciously using Luna's sovereign abilities for years was mind-boggling. But the collar suppressed your conscious access to power. It couldn't completely eliminate abilities that were fundamental to your survival. Lyanna stopped directly in front of me. You've never been as helpless as you believed, Ella. You've been a Luna sovereign in hiding, but a Luna sovereign nonetheless. Something shifted inside me at her words. Not just understanding, but recognition. The strange incidents, the moments when impossible things worked in my favor, the way I'd always been able to endure Margaret's cruelty without breaking completely, none of it had been luck. It had been power. My power. I can see it clicking into place, Lyanna said with satisfaction. Now, hold that realization. Let it fill every corner of your mind. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are not less than anyone in this room or any room you'll ever enter. You are Luna's sovereign, and that means something. The certainty she spoke of began building in my chest like sunrise. Warm, inevitable, growing stronger with each heartbeat. Good. Now, extend your hand toward the wall. I obeyed, not entirely sure what I was supposed to do. Don't think about moving objects or manipulating matter. Think about commanding reality to bend to your will. Because that's what Luna's sovereign power actually is, reality manipulation on a fundamental level. Reality manipulation. The phrase should have seemed impossible, but it felt right in a way that made my newly awakened wolf sing with recognition. I focused on the wall, not trying to push or pull or move anything, but simply expecting it to respond to my will. The steel wall began to ripple like water. Excellent, Lyanna breathed. Now, return it to its original state. I shifted my expectation, and the wall solidified back to normal steel. That's impossible, I said, staring at what I'd just accomplished. No, Alexander said, his voice filled with something like awe. That's what you are. The pride in his tone sent warmth flooding through me, and I felt the mate bond strengthen in response. Whatever else was uncertain about this situation, his belief in me was absolute. Luna's sovereign abilities work on quantum levels, Lyanna explained. You're not just moving objects or manipulating energy, you're convincing reality itself to be different than it was a moment before. It's why our bloodline was so feared. There are very few limits to what you can accomplish once you fully understand your nature. What are the limits? Distance affects precision. Duration affects sustainability. And most importantly, you can only maintain changes that align with natural law over the long term. Reality has a tendency to snap back if you push too hard for too long. I nodded, trying to process the implications. What about other people? Can I affect living beings? Healing, yes. Enhancement of natural abilities, yes. But you can't fundamentally change someone's nature or force them to act against their core self. Free will creates its own reality patterns that resist manipulation. And shielding? Alexander asked. If she's going to face coalition operatives, defense has to be the priority. Observe. Lyanna gestured, and suddenly the air around me shimmered like heat waves. Luna's sovereign shielding works by convincing attacks that they've already missed their target. The energy simply goes elsewhere. I could feel the shield around me, a subtle distortion in reality that felt as natural as breathing. Try it yourself, Lyanna instructed. Expect any attack to simply slide past you. I focused on the concept, on the absolute certainty that nothing could touch me if I didn't allow it. The shimmer around me intensified. Perfect. Now we test it. Lyanna raised her hand, and I felt power gathering around her. Don't flinch. Trust your shield. She released what looked like a bolt of pure moonlight directly at my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to dodge, but I held still, trusting in the shield I'd created. The energy hit my barrier and simply wasn't there anymore. Like it had never existed. Incredible, Alexander murmured. How much damage could that shield absorb? Theoretically. There's no upper limit as long as Ella maintains absolute certainty in her protection. Doubt weakens the effect, but confidence makes it nearly impenetrable. Nearly impenetrable. The qualifier was important, but for now, it was enough to know I wasn't completely defenseless. What's next? I asked. Combat applications, Lyanna said. You'll need offensive capabilities as well as defensive ones. I don't want to hurt anyone. Child, people are going to try to kill you. Your preferences about violence are irrelevant to your survival. The blunt statement hit me like cold water, but she was right. I could be as pacifist as I wanted in theory, but if coalition operatives were hunting me, idealism would get me killed. Show me. Luna's sovereign offensive power works on the same reality manipulation principles as everything else. Instead of commanding objects to move, you command the space between you and your target to become hostile. She demonstrated, pointing at a training dummy across the room. The air around it suddenly became visible, writhing, chaotic energy that tore the dummy apart without her ever touching it directly. The advantage is range and precision. You can target specific individuals even in crowds, and distance is limited only by your line of sight and concentration. I tried it on another dummy, focusing on the idea that the space around it should become destructive. The effect was smaller than Lionna's demonstration, but effective. The dummy crumpled as if crushed by invisible hands. Good. Now, the most important lesson, restraint. Lionna's expression became deadly serious. Luna's sovereign power responds to emotion as much as conscious will. Anger, fear, desperation, they can amplify your abilities beyond your control. You must learn to maintain calm, even in the most desperate circumstances. What happens if I lose control? Alexander and Lionna exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. The last Luna sovereign who lost complete emotional control created the Yellowstone caldera, Lionna said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I was a walking natural disaster, barely contained and learning control on the eve of what might be the fight of my life. No pressure, I muttered. Actually, pressure is exactly what you need, Alexander said unexpectedly. The mate bond helps. My presence will anchor you, give you something to focus on when everything else becomes overwhelming. As if to demonstrate, he stepped closer to the circle, and I immediately felt the chaotic energy in my chest settle into something more manageable. The bond between us acted like a stabilizing force, his steady presence calming the wild power that wanted to reshape reality according to my emotions. Interesting, Lionna observed. I wasn't sure how the mate bond would interact with Luna's sovereign abilities. It seems to enhance control rather than complicate it. Is that unusual? Luna's sovereigns have historically mated within the bloodline to avoid power conflicts. You're the first to bond with a non-sovereign alpha. The effects could be unprecedented. Another variable in an already impossible situation. But as I looked at Alexander, felt the strength and certainty flowing through our bond, I couldn't bring myself to see it as a complication. Whatever challenges we faced, we'd face them together. How much more training do I need before the gala? I asked. Ideally? Years, Lionna replied honestly. Practically? You have 6 days to master enough control to survive whatever comes next. 6 days to learn abilities that should take years to master. 6 days to become someone capable of uniting the werewolf nations. 6 days to prepare for enemies who had been planning my death for over a century. Then we'd better get started, I said, stepping back into the center of the circle. But even as I focused on the training ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that 6 days might not be enough. Somewhere in the city, coalition operatives were already moving. The clock was ticking toward a confrontation that would determine not just my fate, but the future of supernatural society itself. And I was running out of time to become the weapon our people needed me to be. Chapter 5, The Hunt Begins. The first attack came like a whisper in the dark. I'd been training for nearly 20 hours straight, my body pushed beyond exhaustion while my mind buzzed with newfound power that seemed to grow stronger with every lesson. The focusing chamber had become my sanctuary, the silver circle beneath my feet as familiar as breathing. Reality bent to my will with increasing ease, walls rippled like water, energy shields shimmered around me, and training dummies crumpled under invisible forces I commanded with growing confidence. But exhaustion was making my control slip at the edges. Again, Lionna commanded, her ethereal form more solid now, crackling with ancient power that made the air itself feel heavy. Shield, strike, redirect. The combination needs to be instinctive, not conscious thought. I can barely think straight, I gasped, sweat dripping onto the steel floor as I swayed on my feet. My head feels like it's being torn apart from the inside. Coalition operatives won't wait for you to feel refreshed, she replied without a trace of sympathy. They certainly won't pause their attack because you need a nap. Again. Alexander stood at the edge of the circle, his storm gray eyes tracking every movement I made. The mate bond made it physically uncomfortable for us to be more than a few dozen feet apart, but his presence anchored me whenever the reality manipulation threatened to spiral beyond my control. His steady strength flowed through our connection, keeping me grounded when power tried to consume me entirely. "Ella," he said softly, "your emotions are bleeding into your abilities. Center yourself." He was right. Frustration and exhaustion were making my power erratic, dangerous. I took a deep breath, feeling for the calm certainty that made Luna's sovereign abilities possible, and raised my hands toward the training dummy across the room. Shield, reality bent around me, creating a barrier that would convince any attack it had missed its target. Strike, the space around the dummy became hostile, crushing force that reduced it to twisted metal and padding. Redirect. Every alarm in Sterling Tower began screaming at once. The sound was deafening, red emergency lights bathing the training chamber in hellish illumination that made shadows dance across the walls like living things. Alexander was moving before I'd fully processed what was happening, his phone pressed to his ear as authority rang in every word. "Report," he barked, while klaxons wailed around us. I couldn't hear the response over the alarms, but I watched his expression shift from alert to grim to something that looked like barely controlled killing rage. "How many?" A pause that felt like eternity. "Confirmed coalition." Another pause, longer this time, and I saw his jaw clench. "Understood. Initiate full lockdown and get me tactical assessment in 90 seconds. He ended the call and turned to face us, his presence filling the chamber with predatory menace that made my newly awakened wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. 6 operatives, he said, his voice cutting through the alarm noise with absolute clarity. They hit the building's foundation levels with some kind of EMP weapon that took out our primary security grid. They're moving upward, floor by floor, systematically. Looking for me, I said, the certainty settling in my stomach like ice water. Hunting you, he confirmed, and there was something in his tone that promised violence. The good news is they don't know exactly where you are yet. The bad news is they're willing to tear this building apart piece by piece until they find you. Liona's form solidified further, becoming more substantial and infinitely more dangerous looking. Ancient power radiated from her like heat waves. How long until they reach this level? Alexander's phone buzzed with constant updates. 12 minutes, maybe 15 if our remaining security forces can slow their advance. Not enough time to complete her combat training, Lioness said grimly, her eyes fixed on me with something that might have been regret. We'll have to hope what she's learned is sufficient to keep her alive. The weight of impending violence settled over the chamber like a burial shroud. For 20 hours, I'd been practicing on inanimate targets, learning to manipulate reality in controlled, academic exercises. Now I was about to face enemies who wanted me dead, with abilities I'd only just discovered and barely understood. Terror tried to claw its way up my throat. I'm not ready for this. Alexander was beside me in an instant, his hands cupping my face with gentle strength that contradicted the lethal energy pouring off him. Yes, you are. You're Luna's sovereign. You've been ready your entire life, you just didn't know it. The mate bond flared between us, his absolute certainty flowing into me like liquid courage. His belief in me was unwavering, unshakable, a foundation I could build my confidence on even when everything else felt uncertain. My newly awakened wolf lifted her head and snarled with anticipation rather than fear. He was right. Whatever else I lacked in training, I had power. Real, devastating power that had been building inside me for 21 years, waiting for this moment. Liona, I said, turning to my great-grandmother while something fierce and primal stirred in my chest. What happened to the last Luna sovereign who faced coalition forces? Her smile was sharp and predatory, ancient satisfaction gleaming in her ethereal eyes. She took 19 of them with her before they finally brought her down. Only 19? I could feel reality responding to my rising confidence, the air around me beginning to shimmer with barely contained potential. That seems insufficient. Alexander's grin was fierce and proud and absolutely feral. That's my mate. The building shuddered around us, a tremor that ran through steel and concrete like a living thing. Emergency lighting flickered, then died completely, plunging us into darkness so absolute it felt solid. Emergency power kicked in a heartbeat later, but the message was unmistakable. The coalition operatives were systematically dismantling the building's infrastructure as they climbed toward us. They're trying to isolate us, Alexander said, his phone buzzing with frantic updates from security teams throughout the tower. Cut off our communications, eliminate technological advantages, force us into direct confrontation on their terms. Good, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Power thrummed through me like a second heartbeat, reality bending slightly in response to my shifting emotional state. I'm done hiding. I'm done running. I'm done being afraid. And I was. 21 years of cowering, of making myself invisible, of accepting that I was weak and worthless and deserving of whatever cruelty was inflicted on me. The suppression collar was gone. The lies about my nature had been shattered. These operatives wanted to hunt me down like an animal? Let them try. Ella. Lionna's voice carried a warning that cut through my rising bloodlust. Control your emotions. Anger will amplify your power, but it will also make it chaotic, unpredictable. Maybe unpredictable is exactly what they deserve, I replied, feeling reality ripple outward from my body in waves. The elevator chimed. The sound echoed through the chamber like a death knell, impossible and wrong in every way. This level required biometric clearance that only a handful of people in the world possessed. But the numbers above the elevator doors were climbing steadily, 37, 38, 39. My heart hammered against my ribs as the implications hit me. They bypassed the security systems. They're not just coalition operatives, Alexander realized, his voice tight with deadly understanding. They're coalition operatives with inside information. The elevator stopped at our floor. 40. Silence stretched between us like a held breath, pregnant with violence about to be born. Then the doors slid open with a soft hiss that sounded deafeningly loud in the sudden quiet. 4 figures stepped out, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in black tactical gear that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with predatory grace that marked them as apex supernatural beings, and their scent was wrong somehow. Familiar species, werewolf, vampire, something fey, but twisted, corrupted into something else entirely. Luna Sovereign, the woman said, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place but recognized as dangerous. European, maybe Eastern European. You will come with us. Now. I don't think so, I replied, stepping forward out of the focusing circle. Power flowed around me like visible heat waves, and I watched all 4 operatives tense in response to what they could sense but not fully comprehend. The woman smiled, and it was the kind of expression that belonged on something that hunted in the dark. This doesn't have to end in violence, little princess. The coalition has plans for your abilities. Serve willingly, and your mate lives. Resist, and we kill him first, slowly, while you watch. Then we take you anyway. The threat to Alexander sent rage flooding through me so pure and intense that reality itself seemed to stutter around us. The air between us and the operatives became thick, viscous, like trying to breathe underwater. The floor beneath our feet developed hairline cracks that spread outward in impossible geometric patterns. Wrong answer, I snarled, and power erupted from me like a solar flare. The lead operative raised what looked like a modified assault rifle, but before she could fire, I convinced the weapon that it had never existed in the first place. It simply wasn't there anymore. Her hands closed on empty air, and her confident expression cracked into alarm. Her companions reacted faster than human reflexes should have allowed. The vampire launched himself at Alexander with inhuman speed that turned him into a blur of lethal motion, while one of the werewolf operatives began some kind of ritual that made the air around him shimmer with hostile energy. The Fey operative simply vanished, becoming one with shadows that suddenly felt predatory. Alexander met the vampire head-on, his own supernatural speed and strength allowing him to match the coalition assassin blow for blow. They crashed into the steel wall hard enough to leave dents in reinforced metal, a blur of fists and claws and predatory snarls that spoke of ancient hatred between their species. The werewolf's ritual completed, sending a wave of what looked like liquid darkness directly at me. But my shield was already in place, and I simply convinced the attack that I wasn't where it thought I was. The darkness passed harmlessly through the space I occupied, dissipating against the far wall. The Fey operative materialized behind me, blade already descending toward my spine. I spun, reality bending around me like armor, and his weapon shattered against power that refused to acknowledge its existence. Interesting, the woman said, producing a different device, something that hummed with energy and made my teeth ache in their sockets. But Luna's sovereign power has limits, doesn't it? Let's find yours. She fired, and this time it wasn't a physical projectile but raw psychic energy that bypassed my shield entirely. Pain exploded through my skull like white-hot needles, and I stumbled backward, gasping. There we are, she said with satisfaction that made me want to tear her throat out. Psychic disruptors. Your reality manipulation won't protect you from direct attacks on consciousness itself. The agony was overwhelming, like having my brain scraped with broken glass while someone poured acid on the wounds. But through the pain, I could hear Alexander fighting for his life, could feel his desperation and fury through the mate bond. That was when my control didn't just slip, it shattered entirely. Luna's sovereign rage, it turned out, was not simply anger amplified. It was primal, cosmic, the fury of reality itself being denied its proper order. Power flooded through me in a torrent that made every ability I displayed so far seem like parlor tricks performed by a child. The woman's psychic disruptor became a handful of component atoms scattered across dimensional barriers. The werewolf operative's magical protection simply ceased to function, unraveled on a quantum level. The vampire fighting Alexander found himself suddenly, inexplicably, experiencing gravity in reverse, pinned to the ceiling by forces that had decided he belonged elsewhere. The Fey assassin discovered that the shadows he'd been using for concealment now considered him an enemy, turning solid and crushing around him like obsidian fists. Impossible, the woman breathed, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. I was beyond hearing her anyway. Beyond everything except the absolute certainty that these creatures had threatened my mate, had caused him pain, had dared to hunt me in what was becoming my territory. Reality bent around me like heated metal, reshaping itself according to my will with no regard for physics or natural law. The coalition operatives found themselves trapped in space that had become solid, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except experience the crushing weight of Luna's sovereign displeasure. The training chamber itself began to warp under the pressure of uncontrolled power. Steel walls flowed like mercury. The ceiling developed fractures that spread in patterns that hurt to look at. The floor beneath our feet rippled with each heartbeat, becoming liquid then solid then something that existed in states between matter and energy. Ella. Alexander's voice cut through the haze of power and rage like a sword through silk. Stop. You're going to collapse the building. His words reached me through the mate bond, and I gradually became aware of what I was doing. The entire chamber was reshaping itself around us, reality responding to emotions I couldn't control. I was doing exactly what Lyanna had warned me about, losing restraint, letting power run wild, becoming the kind of catastrophic force that had convinced the world Luna's sovereigns needed to be eliminated. With tremendous effort that felt like lifting mountains, I pulled back, convinced reality to return to something resembling its original state. The coalition operatives dropped to the floor, alive but shaking, their faces pale with shock and something that looked like religious terror. "Magnificent display," the woman managed, though her voice trembled. "But there are more of us. Many more. And next time we come prepared for." "There won't be a next time," Alexander said quietly, moving toward the four operatives with predatory grace that promised violence. His clothes were torn from the fight, blood seeping from claw marks across his chest, but he moved like death itself given form. "Because you're going to tell us exactly how many coalition forces are in this city, where they're based, and what their operational parameters are." "We tell you nothing, Sterling Prince." Alexander smiled, and it was one of the most terrifying expressions I'd ever witnessed. "You misunderstand the situation. I wasn't asking you. I was informing you of what you're going to do." He looked at me, storm gray eyes bright with lethal anticipation. "Ella, can Luna's sovereign abilities compel absolute honesty?" I considered the question, feeling out the edges of my power with new understanding. "I can convince them that deception is physically impossible." "Do it." It was easier than it should have been, reality bending around the four operatives in ways that made lying a violation of fundamental natural law. Truth became the only option their minds could process. "How many coalition operatives are currently in this city?" Alexander asked. 47, the woman answered immediately, her eyes widening with shock at her own compliance. "Where is your base of operations?" "The Old Meridian Hotel. Floors 12 through 18 have been converted to operational headquarters." "What are your specific orders regarding Ella?" "Capture intact if possible. Terminate if resistance proves excessive. The Luna's sovereign bloodline cannot be permitted to reach full manifestation." Alexander looked at me, grim satisfaction written across his features. "Well, now we know what we're dealing with." 47 operatives, I repeated, testing how the number felt. It was larger than I'd hoped, smaller than I'd feared. "That's a significant force." "It's a war party," he corrected grimly. "Which means the coalition isn't conducting assassination attempts anymore. They're preparing for open warfare." Lyanna, who had remained silent during the battle, finally spoke. "Then hiding is no longer an option. The Luna's sovereign must be publicly acknowledged, must take her place as a symbol around which our people can rally." "The mate selection gala," I said, understanding crystallizing like ice in my veins. "No longer a political ceremony," Alexander agreed. "A declaration of intent. A line drawn in sand that forces every supernatural power to choose a side." The weight of that realization settled over all of us like lead blankets. In 4 days, I would stand before representatives of every major supernatural faction and publicly claim my heritage. I would become not just Alexander's mate, but the focal point around which an entire war would pivot. "Are you ready for that responsibility?" Alexander asked quietly. I looked at the 4 coalition operatives, still held motionless by reality that had learned to obey me. Looked at the warped training chamber that bore testament to power I was only beginning to understand. Felt the mate bond humming between Alexander and me, unbreakable and eternal. "I'm Luna's sovereign," I said, and for the first time, the title felt like absolute truth rather than impossible dream. Ready or not, it's what I was born to become. But even as I spoke the words with conviction, uneasiness crawled up my spine. 47 operatives wouldn't be easily defeated, and the gala would draw every enemy I had into the same room. The coalition had been planning this for decades, maybe centuries. The hunt had begun in earnest. But I was no longer prey cowering in shadows. Now I was the weapon that would either save the supernatural world or watch it burn in the attempt. And in 4 days, everyone would discover which fate awaited us all.
If this story captured your heart, then subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. That's how you'll never miss your next epic romance. Want to share this journey with a friend who loves fated mates and alpha heroes as much as you do? Share this video and get lost in the story together. We live for your reactions. Tell us in the comments, who was your favorite character? Until the next chronicle, I'm Georgina. Thank you for listening.